What if the maid you hired wasn't just cleaning dust, but uncovering the darkest secrets you buried? When a billionaire's cameras catch his black maid leaving cryptic messages in light, the truth she reveals threatens his empire, his freedom, and everything he thought was hidden forever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more powerful tales like this one. Your support keeps the stories coming. Adrian Cole didn't believe in luck. He believed in numbers, graphs, and the way a camera's quiet red LED never blinked unless there was truth to record. The penthouse had 42 of those little red eyes. Hallways, gallery, private study, service elevator, even the narrow vestibule outside the vault he pretended didn't exist. They were his comfort after too many headlines, too many lawsuits that turned his name into a verb, people whispered. On Monday morning, the agency sent the new maid. "Amara," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her voice held a warmth that belonged to places where mornings came braided with birdsong. She wore a crisp grey uniform with sleeves rolled neatly to the forearms and carried a canvas tote that had clearly seen many careful mendings. No perfume, no clatter, only quiet self-possession that made the chief of staff glance up once, then twice. "You'll report to facilities," the chief of staff said briskly. "We're meticulous here." "I can be meticulous," Amara replied. Adrian barely nodded. He had an investor call in 6 minutes and a security consultant in the lobby insisting that someone had cloned one of his key cards. He watched Amara on the foyer monitor as she inspected a brass stand with the same attention a jeweler gives a rough stone. Noted, she used 2 cloths, one damp, one dry, and she polished in small concentric circles. Noted, she didn't gawk at the Basquiat. Most people did. By noon, the penthouse hummed with the specific silence of money at work. Staff moved like clock hands. Amara learned the routes, the back corridors, the service elevator that smelled faintly of machine oil, the pantry drawer where someone hid illicit cinnamon gum. She didn't ask questions. She noticed things. At 3:11 p.m., when the apartment emptied for the daily debrief and the art restorer's visit, Amara was alone in the main gallery. The nearest camera watched from the corner near the ceiling, angled to capture anyone approaching. The study. She paused mid-dust, set down her feather wand, and slipped the canvas tote from her shoulder. Adrian saw it later, when the day had been logged and boxed, and the investors hung up. He poured something amber and expensive, opened the security app, and scrolled to 3:11 p.m. out of habit. Out of the belief that cameras didn't lie. On screen, Amara knelt before the grand piano. She removed a small, flat parcel from her tote, wrapped in brown paper bound with twine, and placed it on the closed lid. She stood very still for 7 seconds, eyes closed, palms resting flat on the polished black surface. Then she unwrapped the parcel. Not jewelry, not cash. A mute tuning fork, a folded piece of plain white paper, and a tiny bottle with a dropper. She tapped the tuning fork once against the edge of the piano bench. A whisper of a note, barely audible. She held it, vibrating, over the strings with the lid still closed, as if listening for something beneath the wood. Then, with clinical care, she drew the dropper across the piano's finish in 3 short strokes near the hinge. Adrian leaned closer to the tablet, to the pixelated swirl of light on lacquer. The cameras weren't built for art. They were built for proof. Amara didn't smile. She didn't frown. She folded the paper, slipped it under the metronome like a secret nobody had asked to hear, and turned toward the study, the one room he never let staff enter, unsupervised. She paused at the threshold, lifted her hand, and touched the door, not at the handle, but an inch above the brass plate, exactly where a hidden sensor read warmth and pulse. Her fingers stayed there for a heartbeat. 2. Then she withdrew her hand, smoothed her sleeves, collected the tuning fork, and went back to dusting crown molding as if nothing had happened. Adrian rewound, watched again. froze the frame where her fingertips hovered over the lock, zoomed in. The resolution broke into squares. No answers there, only questions. At 3:47 p.m., Amara moved to the portrait wall, his grandfather staring down with a gaze sharp as winter. She adjusted 2 frames by a fraction of an inch, angling them until their glass caught the recessed lights just so. From another camera's vantage point, the glare formed 3 pale slashes on the portrait's surface. From the study camera, those same slashes looked like letters. Z-O. He blinked. The light shifted when she moved. The letters vanished. At 4:02 p.m., Amara returned to the piano, wiped away whatever the dropper had left, and rewrapped the tuning fork. She tucked the parcel into her tote and, before leaving, glanced up at the camera in the far corner. Not a smile, not a challenge, a simple acknowledgement as if to say, "I know you're there." By 6:30 p.m., the penthouse was full again. Assistants, a chef, the art restorer judging humidity. Amara left with the others, her tote slung over her shoulder, her steps measured. The elevators closed. The red LEDs resumed their indifferent glow. Adrian watched the last frame. He told himself he'd seen a woman test polish. He told himself he'd seen nothing at all. He also told himself, because he didn't believe in luck, that people rarely do odd things for no reason, and that reasons, like footprints, always led somewhere. He scrolled back once more to the moment she touched the study door, and the amber in his glass suddenly tasted like brass. The security consultant, Zane, with the clipped diction of a man who measured time in billable increments, arrived after dinner to audit the alarms. Adrian didn't mention the tuning fork. He didn't mention the odd gleam on the portraits, or the way letters had briefly appeared where there should have been glare. He simply said, "Run the perimeter again," and pretended that would suffice. Zane didn't believe in luck either. He believed in attack surfaces. "Keycard clones are up this quarter," he said, frowning at a tablet of his own. "We'll rotate your tokens." "Good," Adrian said, eyes still on his phone. He scrubbed through footage like a priest with beads. "Lobby, elevator, kitchen, gallery." "New staff?" Zane asked without looking up. "Agency Maid," Adrian answered. "Amara." Zane's finger danced. "We'll brief her on restricted zones." "Do that." He hesitated. "Do it in the morning." He waited until the penthouse had sighed itself to sleep, and the screens went from the day's clutter to the clean geometry of the night. Lights dimmed. The gallery deepened, the art becoming dark windows into darker rooms. The only constant was the red of the cameras, tiny little hearts refusing to stop. At 2:13 a.m., the service elevator stirred. Adrian's pulse ticked up. The night porter taking trash down? The schedule said 2:45. He pinched to zoom. The doors slid open to no one. Then a hand appeared, thin, gloved, holding the door just wide enough for a slim figure to slide through. Not Amara. The hips were broader, the shoulders too narrow. A man? Hard to tell in a black hoodie and cap. He moved with the confidence of someone who had counted the steps and the cameras and every creak of a certain tile. He crossed the vestibule toward the study. Adrian clicked to the study feed. The door whispered open. "Zane," he said, already dialing. "We have a breach." By the time Zane reached the control room, the intruder had spent 3 minutes in the study. He never looked up. He went directly to the bookshelf, slid a specific volume from its place, and pressed his palm against the painted wall behind it. A panel opened. The man reached in, withdrew a flat case the size of a paperback, and tucked it under his hoodie. "Inside job," Zane muttered. "Or someone with intel." The intruder replaced the book. He palmed the wall. The panel sealed. He left as quietly as he came, vanishing into the elevator's mirrored mouth. "You said the tokens would be rotated," Adrian heard himself say, the way people hear their voices from the bottom of a well. Zane was already calling his team. "We'll pull elevator." Logs, locked the building down, no exits without ID scans. They combed, they found nothing. The elevator logs were clean as bleached bone. No keycard pings, no anomalies except the one on screen. At 3:41 a.m., once the last security guard had muttered into his radio and the last door had been triple-checked, Zane said, "We'll have to assume tampering. Someone spoofed credentials." Adrian nodded. He swirled cold coffee, wished for something stronger, and swiped back to the day's earlier hours. He found himself again at 3:11 p.m., at the precise moment when Amara had drawn 3 faint lines on the piano with her dropper. He froze the frame, enhanced nothing, because the cameras refused to make art of truth. He stared at her expression instead. Not guilt, not thrill, not fear. "Focus. What are you seeing?" Zane asked, peering over his shoulder. "Someone who pays attention," Adrian said, "maybe more than I do." They reviewed the afternoon from another angle. In one camera's reflection inside a glass cabinet, the study door's indicator light glowed blue as staff passed, locked. When Amara touched the panel above the brass, the blue flickered to green for a fraction of a second, and then back. "Did you see that?" Zane leaned in. "She didn't open it, but she triggered a blink." "How?" Adrian asked. "Some sensor arrays will pre-auth at a sub-threshold if the thermal pattern matches a stored print, even without a key token." Zane's mouth tightened. She was probing it. For what? To map it. Zane tapped the screen. "Think of it like echolocation." Adrian's eyes returned to the piano. "And the dropper? Could be nothing. Could be conductive fluid. Could be scent masking. Could be showmanship." She looked into the camera, Adrian said, mostly to himself. "Twice. People do that when they're nervous." "She didn't look nervous," Adrian said. The investor call, scheduled for the morning, suddenly felt laughable. Cautious men arguing over decimals while someone glided through sealed rooms like smoke. Adrian scrubbed forward to the moment Amara adjusted the portraits. He froze the reflection of the recessed lights, catching the glass. Z-O-L. The third slash hadn't made the full A before the angle changed. "Zol," Zane murmured. "Means nothing to me." "It means something to someone," Adrian said. The name felt familiar, like a word half heard on a bad connection. He let it go. It would return, or it wouldn't. At 6:05 a.m., the staff arrived. At 7:12 a.m., Amara stepped off the elevator with her tote and her calm and her attention to detail. Adrian watched her greet the concierge with a wave, tuck a stray thread back into her cuff, and move through the foyer as if she knew exactly how many eyes were on her. He didn't stop her when she approached the piano. He didn't stop her when she carefully, almost reverently, lifted the metronome and slid the folded paper out from beneath it. She held it for a beat, considering. Then she tucked it into her tote. "Follow her," Adrian said. Zane was already on it. Amara moved to the gallery, dusted, straightened, adjusted angles by millimeters. She passed the study door without touching it. She never looked at the camera. But when she reached the end of the corridor, she paused, head turned as if listening. A small smile flickered, gone in an instant. Then she kept walking. Zane lowered his tablet. "You want me to bring her in?" "Not yet." Adrian's voice surprised. He measured, almost curious. "I want to see what she does when she thinks the cameras are just cameras." He zoomed out to the mosaic of feeds. Everywhere little red LEDs watched. Everywhere the surfaces of his life reflected back a man who believed in control. A man who, for the first time in years, wasn't sure who in his own house knew more than he did. The note under the metronome should have been the first thing Adrian demanded to see. It wasn't. He had told himself that patience wins wars, that seeing the full pattern eclipses grabbing at single threads. Still, the thread tugged at him. 9:30 a.m., in a pause between calls, He stepped into the gallery, where Amara was coaxing a dull gleam into a bronze sculpture like she was waking it from sleep. Up close, he noticed what the cameras couldn't: the way her breath quieted as she worked, the way she measured the weight of her cloth like a violinist testing a bow. "You left something under my metronome yesterday," he said, voice neutral. She didn't startle. She finished a slow, careful circle, then turned. "I left it where it would be found," she said. "By you, or by anyone you trust to watch on your behalf." "What was it?" he asked. "Instructions," she said. "For what?" "For looking," she said, "properly." He studied her face for tells. There were none. "You're very sure of yourself, Ms. Amara." "Just sure of the difference between dust and fingerprints," she said kindly. "May I ask you a question in return?" He nodded. "How many frames hang in this gallery?" She didn't look away from him. "Not the art, the frames." 41, he said automatically. "Wealth teaches you to count." 42, she said gently. "There is one inside the study where nobody dusts but you." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Not without letting her see the tiny shock that she was right. The inner frame behind the bookshelf, the one that secured a panel she couldn't possibly know was there. She turned back to her work. "Collectors often think dust is camouflage," she said. "It's a record." When she moved on, Zane appeared from a shadow like a stage cue. "She's playing you. She's telling me something." "Same thing," Zane muttered. Adrian returned to the control room. He finally pulled the still from the piano camera. At 3:12 p.m. and overlaid it with the night's footage of the intruder. He had the angle of the piano lid, the glint of the dropper, the tuning fork's exact position. He had 3 letters in light. Zol. He needed one more inch of truth. He called down to facilities. "Send me the bag the night porter emptied from the piano's waste bin." It arrived in a minute. A clear plastic sack with the day's unceremonious throwaways, lint, a juice cap, a broken elastic, a paper triangle folded and refolded again. He fished the triangle out and unfolded it. Not a letter, a map, no street names, no legend, only arrows and angles and a series of neat block letters in Amara's careful hand. "Look from gallery cam 14 at 3:15 p.m. Read the lights, not the labels. If you cannot see it, tilt the frame. Show me cam 14 3:15, Adrian said. The feed popped open, the long shot down the portrait corridor. He scrubbed forward to 3:15 p.m. in the upper right corner of the frame, where glare kissed glass. At just the right angle, 3 lines became 3 letters. The 4th required a tilt nobody had made, yet he stood, walked to the gallery. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon oil and something else, metallic, like air before rain. He moved to the 3rd portrait from the study door, lifted it a hair, angled it 3 degrees. In the glass, the recessed lights aligned. Zola, Zola, a name, not a code. From the control room, Zane's voice crackled through the intercom. "What is it?" "A person," Adrian said. The familiarity fell into place. Ugly and precise, the Zola report. The name buried in a class action brief 3 years ago from a mine his company had owned and sold. A place whose dust still clung to the hems of his reputation. Zola Nkosi, community organizer, whistleblower, presumed dead in a collapse the company had blamed on illegal artisanal pits. The case had settled. The headlines had faded. Amara had spelled her name in light. Adrian lowered the frame and stood very still. He remembered the way Amara had touched the study door, the way the indicator had flickered. He remembered the intruder's certainty, his hand sliding to the hidden panel as if guided. He remembered the parcel, the tuning fork, the tiny bottle like a vial of intention. "Zane," he said, voice low. "Night footage shows a man opening a panel behind the shelf." "I saw," Zane replied. "He took a case." "There shouldn't have been a case," Adrian said. Unless someone put one back after we sold the mine. Something we didn't. Want to keep in the official archive. Zane swore softly. You think the maid knew he was coming? I think she wanted me to see what I never looked at, Adrian said, because I didn't like what it would ask of me. He returned to the piano, lifted the lid. In the dark architecture of strings, a small black disc was magnetic clipped to the inner rim. A wafer camera no bigger than a coin. He didn't call security. He didn't shout. He simply stared at the tiny black eyes staring back, wondering. And who it sent its picture to? A journalist, a court, a sister. He took a breath, then another, and caught it. A faint, almost floral note. Not perfume, the residue of the dropper. He dabbed a finger where Amara had drawn her 3 strokes and rubbed gently. The varnish resisted. Whatever she'd applied was gone now, but the scent lingered. Something botanical and conductive. Something that worked with light. He closed the lid, set the metronome back. When he turned around, Amara stood in the archway, hands folded, eyes steady. You found her name, she said. He nodded. Good, she said, and for the first time, a small, tired relief softened her face. Then we can stop pretending I'm here only for dust. They spoke in the small sitting room off the gallery, a room that existed for conversations nobody wanted recorded. Of course, this one would be. Cameras were like conscience. They multiplied when you thought you'd hidden them. Tea? Amara offered, as if they were about to discuss fabrics. She poured without waiting for an answer, then sat with her back to the window. The city's river, a blade of light behind her. Her hands were steady. Her tote rested against her ankle. Tell me what you did, Adrian said, throat tight. All of it. I took a job I was overqualified for, she said, not unkindly. I came into your home every day and did what I was paid to do. Clean, and when I was alone, I left you a story you could not ignore. The tuning fork? The dropper, the frames. The fork woke the piano's strings, she said. Vibration can reveal hairline cracks or cameras. Yours has both. You knew I would look. I knew you watch everything, she said. What you don't watch, the men you pay watch for you. And the dropper? Water with a trace of graphite and rosemary, she said. Graphite to play with light on varnish, rosemary to cut the lemon oil so the smell was new enough. To draw your attention, but not alarming. She lifted a shoulder. Old archivist trick. Makes micro-residue flash under certain LEDs. Your recessed lights are very helpful. He blinked. Archivist. I kept records for a trust in Johannesburg, she said. My sister Zola organized our families when the mine shook itself apart and we were told it was our fault. After she died, I catalogued every scrap connected to the case. The settlement paid for a new clinic and a road. It did not bring back my sister. Adrian's tongue went dry. He had sat in rooms where men said things like market realities and comparative risk. He had nodded and not looked at the photographs. I wrote to you, Amara continued. Nothing. I wrote to your board. Nothing. I sent a file to a journalist. He published a thin piece. People shrugged. The cameras in your house, they do. Not shrug. So I let them catch me touching the one door you keep warm and waking the one instrument you keep tuned. I left letters in the light. And last night, he asked quietly, the intruder. I wanted him caught, she said. The case he took belonged to your company once, in a way that allowed it to never belong to anyone who could use it, a private archive, off the books. I believe it holds doctored shift logs and a memo that reclassified a crack as cosmetic, so production would not pause. Marcus would know more. The name landed like a hammer. Marcus Ellery, Chief Financial Officer, Adrian's oldest ally, a man with a preternatural gift for moving numbers from one column to the one where they made better sense. Marcus, Adrian said, though the disbelief in his voice was thinner than he wished. He's been in the study twice at night in the last month, Amara said. He moves like a man who has measured where he is safe. He does not look up at cameras when he knows which angle will not see his face. Why tell me? Adrian asked. Why not simply take the footage to the police? Because I do not need you punished, she said softly. I need you to choose. If I push too hard, you will fall to the side that is easier. If you watch yourself see it, you might choose the harder side. He searched her face. He saw no triumph there, no vengeance completed, only a grief weathered into something steady. What happens if I choose wrong? He asked. Then I send everything to a woman who will not stop, she said. She is not impressed by rich men who invent verbs with their names. She is impressed by ledgers and standards, and the fact that cameras remember when people lie. He almost laughed. It came out like a gasp. You came into my house to teach me shame. No, she said. I came to ask you for courage. He stood and paced, the old defense against decisions that felt like cliffs. He could fire her, he could call a lawyer and Zane and Marcus in a single sweep and let the machinery grind until it smoothed this into dust again. Except the cameras were full of the sight of a black woman kneeling at his piano like a priest and drawing 3 faint strokes that turned light into language. They were full of her hand hovering over a hot sensor until it told a secret. They were full of his own face as he read the letters he had helped bury 3 years ago. What did you put under the metronome today? He asked finally. A copy of the intruder's image, she said, from a camera you did not know you had, and an address. Whose address? The storage unit where Marcus keeps the things that do not exist, she said. He rented it under a name that makes him laugh. He is not imaginative. How did you... Dust and fingerprints, she said, a gentle echo of her earlier words. And a friend who understands how bills get paid. He sat. For once, he didn't reach for a graph. He didn't reach for a name to call to make this somebody else's job. He looked at Amara, at the careful way she held herself in a room that did not belong to her, but was, at least for this hour, hers entirely. If I do this, he said, it will tear things open. They were never closed, she said. You only learned to walk around the seam. The rest unfolded with the crispness of a checklist and the mess of something human. At noon, Adrian asked Marcus to join him in the study. He watched, from the corner of his eye, the way Zane lingered just beyond the doorway, like a shadow with a badge. He watched the camera's red LED, steady and small, waiting to make memory. Problem? Marcus said, settling into a leather chair as if it were his own. He looked good on camera, which is not the same as looking good to oneself. Your message sounded urgent. I had a visitor last night, Adrian said mildly. Took something. From behind the shelf. Marcus's mouth pulled into what he thought was a concerned line. A breach we should call... I think you already did, Adrian said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Storage unit on 10th, unit C12. Rented 6 months after we sold the mine. Alias A. Coulson. Cute. Marcus went absolutely still. Camera still. A tell for men who managed optics for a living. The sudden absence of motion where bluster should be. The calculation clicking like a meter. I don't know what you're... Stop, Adrian said. I've spent years paying you to finish my sentences. You did it too well. He slid a printed still across the desk. A grainy image from the service elevator, a man's profile turned just enough to be obvious. Marcus didn't look down. He looked at Adrian with a very old expression. Betrayal rehearsed as indignation. You want to throw me under to save yourself? I want to pull us both out before we drown, Adrian said. We built a thing that ate people. Zane stepped into the room. 2 uniformed officers followed, pre-briefed and not inclined to be dazzled. The next movements belonged to them. Rights read, silence requested, the dignified choreography of accountability beginning. Marcus laughed once, a small sound that confused even him, and then he said nothing. Tell them about the memo, Adrian said quietly. The one that moved the crack to a column called cosmetic. Tell them who wrote it, then tell them who ignored it. Marcus's eyes flicked to the camera. He understood, finally, that this was not a negotiation in a quiet corner. This was a recording in a room lined with the reflective surfaces of a man who had learned too late to look at himself. Hours later, the storage unit's lock surrendered to a warrant. Inside, the off-books archive waited. Cases labeled in a hand Marcus tried to disguise, ledgers with neat columns of altered dates, an external drive with a directory structure like a maze designed to confuse strangers and reassure its maker. Zane catalogued, the officers photographed. A chain of custody began. When it was done, when the first long breath of consequence had been exhaled, Adrian returned to the penthouse and found Amara in the gallery, wiping a single fingerprint from a frame. It started, he said. I know, she said. I watched. You could have destroyed me, he said. Half a question, half a confession. Amara set her cloth down. I don't make a hobby of destroying men, she said. I reclaim stories people tried to throw away. He nodded. He thought of Zola, her name spelled in reflections because a court transcript had not been enough. He thought of how many rooms he had sat in, believing that distance was innocence. There will be a press conference, he said. I will say things. Some will be true. Some will be careful. Make more of them true, she said gently. He looked up at the camera. In the corner, its red dot no longer comfort, not exactly judgment, something closer to witness. What do you want? He asked. Not from the law. From me. Amara considered. It was not a theatrical pause. It was a woman measuring what her mouth could ask of a man who had finally decided to be looked at. Zola led with a question. She said, What will you build where you took? She met his eyes. Build that. He let the words land. He saw the shape of them. Reparations that were more than PR, a fund not administered by people who shared his cufflinks, a policy that would outlast him and be audited by someone who had no reason to fear him. He saw the ledger columns moving in the only way that mattered, toward balance. Stay, he said before he thought better of it. Not as a maid, as what? As the person who tells me when I'm lying to myself, he said. Officially. She smiled then, a small crack of sun through hard cloud. That is not a job people advertise, she said. But if you mean build the fund, open the records, sit with families without cameras, sign things that cost, and hire a panel that can fire you if you fail, then yes, I can point. Point, he repeated, almost laughing. You've been pointing in light for 2 days. Longer, she said. The press conference came. It was messier than his communications team wanted and cleaner than his lawyers recommended. He spoke, and he did not say market realities once. He said names. He said Zola Nkosi first. He said her name into microphones that were not built for prayer, and somehow it was won. In the days that followed, the footage of Amara at the piano leaked. Of course it did. People argued witchcraft, espionage, theatre, grace, the internet, as a talent for missing the point and circling it until the friction throws sparks. What she did when alone was unusual, yes. She tuned a room until it sang back what someone had tried to silence. She coaxed light into letters. She made a billionaire watch himself see. Weeks later, when a child in a village thousands of miles away got a new clinic with a roof that didn't leak, a woman there said, Zola would have liked this. It was not forgiveness. It was a beginning in the penthouse. The cameras stayed. The little red eyes didn't change color, but sometimes, when Amara walked past them, she lifted 2 fingers in an absent-minded salute, an old habit, a nod to witnesses. She still polished frames. She still noticed dust, and on certain afternoons, when the light came in at an angle and the room felt less like a vault and more like a page, she would tilt a portrait by a degree or 2, Watch the reflection line up and make sure the name held its shape.